Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Cornell, and I'm president of Elected Officials to Protect America, and really excited to be working with the Climate Action Campaign and their Solutions for Pollutions campaign to reduce carbon pollution and protect our health and safety. The EPA proposed standards are especially important with the wildfires happening right now in Canada and the air quality that's really harming everyone in Philadelphia and across the United States. Personally, I haven't seen this kind of air quality since I was in Afghanistan, and we should never be having wartime air quality in a peaceful place in the birth of democracy in the United States. The new standards will slash carbon pollution by 617 million metric tons, and that's roughly equivalent to half the cars in the United States. This is significant. It will help ensure clean air and a healthy, clean climate for all Pennsylvanians and folks across the nation. Importantly, preserving the lives of 1,300 people from premature deaths in 2030 alone, and an additional 300,000 asthma attacks, particularly in communities that have traditionally been harmed by the fossil fuel industry and the pollutants coming from there. This is extremely important for their health, safety, and the prosperity of these communities. I'd like also to mention that we're sending a letter to our Pennsylvania delegation to stand up for a strong climate pollution plan that will deliver clean air and healthier climate. The letter comes from leaders across Pennsylvania and the United States. We need to do everything we can to tackle the climate crisis, protect our health, and slash the pollution that harms our communities, especially those that have been disproportionately harmed by pollution that live along the fence lines of fossil fuel facilities. So I'd like to now introduce our first speaker here. Commissioner Miller is kind enough to have been creative and join us virtually. And so we were going to do the very tried and true solution, holding him up to the microphone for Zoom, and he will deliver a few statements. Commissioner Miller.
Hi, good morning, Alex. Yep, hi, my name is Marty Miller. I'm one of the commissioners in West Norriton Township, Montgomery County, right near the county seat of Norristown. I am serving my second term as commissioner here in the township, and my focus as commissioner is really on the environment. Our township borders the Schuylkill River, so we have a huge debt to the environment here to be good stewards of it. And in fact, twice, since I've twice been elected, I've taken the oath of office, swearing an oath to the Constitution of Pennsylvania, which among other things, guarantees our residents clean air. So that, I think that dovetails well with my government experience. However, I'm also a pharmacist, and I've been a pharmacist for over 20 years working in and around Philadelphia. I know the impact that poor environmental conditions have on patients, especially those with asthma, COPD, other chronic breathing conditions. See the expense of money, the expense of time going to doctor's offices, the lost productivity and education in caring for young folks who can't go to school, and then their parents or guardians have to kind of tend to them while they're recovering to ensure that they remain healthy. So environmental issues tend to have a cascading effect on not only the health of our communities, but the economy of our communities. These EPA standards are a good start, in my opinion, and I think that they're very important to ensure that our communities are assured their constitutional rights to clean air. Certainly as an elected official, we have no interest in stifling business and stifling the productivity of our communities and the prosperity of our communities. But at the same time, we have to balance that against the needs and health of everyone who lives here. So I'm very much in favor of these EPA standards coming forward. Like Alex said, to take roughly the equivalent of half the personal vehicles off the road over the course of the span of this these standards and to see the reduction in our healthcare, the stress on our healthcare system, which obviously 3 years ago, we don't have to remind anyone, was terribly stressed by the coronavirus epidemic, and that still plagues us today. So anything we can do to help our first responders, our communities, our businesses, and most importantly, the people who live here, it's incumbent upon us to advocate for those policies whenever possible. I think we have a great opportunity to advocate to our congressional delegates, and we have 19 folks that represent our Commonwealth in Washington. And I am really hopeful that they will pay heed to this and do their best to advocate that these EPA standards get applied as quickly as possible, so we can help to continue to honor our oath to the Pennsylvania Constitution to ensure that our residents have clean air. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's well stated. And to provide the credibility and really the science behind that, the Union of Concerned Science has been tirelessly working and educating fellow elected officials and policymakers about the importance of these proposed EPA standards.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for being here to communicate to the U.S. public on the urgency to address carbon pollution from fossil fuel power plants. My name is Juan Barreto, and I am a senior social scientist for climate vulnerability with the Union of Concerned Scientists, a science-based nonprofit organization working to address the climate crisis in an equitable way and with the best science. Carbon pollution from power plants accounts for 1/4 of the global warming pollution generated in the United States. Reducing carbon pollution for power plants is a fundamental step in decarbonizing large parts of the rest of our economy by enabling a transition from fossil fuels to clean, renewable sources of electricity. Though much progress has been made in the availability of renewable sources of energy, such as wind and solar, if we don't directly address pollution from coal and gas plants, the country's transition to clean energy will not happen fast enough to put a dent on the carbon emissions that are cooking the planet. And unequivocally, the planet is getting cooked. Extreme weather made worse by climate change is driving terrible and inequitable impacts on the lives and well-being of millions of people across the United States and its territories. We're still early in the summer season, but just take a look at the deadly heat wave that has gripped most of Texas, many areas in the south and northern Mexico, due to a heat dome that has been hovering over the region. A heat wave made 5 times more likely by climate change, according to our scientific colleagues at Climate Central in Princeton, New Jersey. And there is no relief in sight. If this were not enough, global warming is but one of the threats of coal and gas-fired power plants to human health. As public health experts such as May DeMarco know, and you will hear from her as well, fossil fuel-fired power plants spew out toxic pollutants that are so detrimental to human health that there is no safe lower limit to exposure in the air, soil, and water. Strong power plant carbon pollution standards would go a long way to help meet President Biden's goal of cutting carbon emissions in half from 2005 levels by the end of the decade. The EPA has both the authority and the obligation to enact, for the first time, limits to carbon emissions from the nation's gas and coal-fired power plants, which threaten human health and are driving the planet to ever more catastrophic climate extremes. Importantly, while this rulemaking focuses on climate pollution, there are multiple additional EPA rulemakings that are also in progress to address other harmful pollution from these plants, such as mercury and coal ash. When taken together, this suite of rules, if robustly designed and fully enforced, will increase the regulatory accountability facing fossil fuel power plants for their many pollution harms, further tipping the scales in favor of clean energy alternatives. In my own scientific research with other UCS scientists, we have found that weakening existing protections from large sources of dangerous industrial air pollutants will only increase emissions that damage human health and allow polluters to pass down the cost of their irresponsible actions to communities who pay with their lives and well-being. And we also have confirmed with data that environmental justice communities have known all along that their communities bear the brunt of exposure to dangerous power air pollutants. One critical component of addressing these inequitable exposures will be to strengthen requirements for state implementation plans regarding environmental justice analysis, including to potentially conduct cumulative impacts analysis, something that environmental justice advocates have been asking for a long time. The EPA must enact the strongest possible carbon pollution standards. Making this a reality will require a groundswell of public support to close loopholes in the environmental and health protections that fossil fuel polluters are exploiting to avoid their moral obligation to protect public health. At UCS, we know that the fossil fuel industry disseminates this information to baselessly cast doubt on the science. Scientists have established, beyond reasonable doubt, the role that fossil fuels have on driving planet warming emissions, as well as on toxic pollution that threatens our health, but in particular that of environmental justice and other frontline communities who live closer to coal and gas-fired power plants and are more impacted. The delay tactics of the fossil fuel industry have run their course, and the time for the EPA to enact the strongest possible standards is now. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marie DeMarco, and I am a health educator and medical advocacy coordinator with Physicians for Social Responsibility Pennsylvania. Physicians for Social Responsibility Pennsylvania is a public health nonprofit that advocates for social and environmental justice across Pennsylvania to improve individual and community health. As part of my work as a health educator, I do research on the health outcomes related to outdoor air pollution exposure caused by oil and gas drilling, or otherwise known as fracking in Pennsylvania. The United States Environmental Protection Agency has published a proposed plan to cut climate pollution from existing, power plants. Excuse me for one moment. From existing gas and new gas power plants. According to the Compendium of Science, Medical, and Media findings demonstrating the risks, harms of fracking and associated oil and gas infrastructure, published by Physicians of Social Responsibility National and Concerned Health Professionals of New York, more than 17.6 million US residents live or work within a half mile to an active oil or gas well, which is emitting greenhouse gas emissions. In Pennsylvania alone, almost 1.5 million people live or work within a half mile of an active oil or gas well. These individuals and their communities are exposed to harmful emissions, which have an impact on our health and our climate. We need the strongest possible safeguards put forth for these communities to reduce health risk and for the protection of public health. People who work at drilling sites are at the highest risk of obtaining negative health outcomes caused by outdoor air pollution. Individuals in these communities are directly affected by these toxic chemicals as they get into the environment through air, water, or soil, and then come into contact with people through inhalation, ingestion, and absorption, or skin contact. Individuals in these communities present with multiple health disparities that include reduced lung function, and increased prevalence of asthma, and increased prevalence of COPD, and multiple cancers such as acute lymphatic leukemia and Ewing sarcoma. Women and men living in these communities with fracking can be at risk for reduced fertility outcomes due to air pollution caused by the pesticides and fracking chemicals, such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. These pollutants are an environmental health concern that can put women at risk for polycystic ovary syndrome, endometriosis, and infertility. As a public health professional, I urge President Biden and the EPA Administrator Michael Regan to finalize the strongest possible climate standards to keep the president's promise to cut climate pollution by 50% by 2030. A strong standard will improve our health, our climate, and our future. Thank you.
Great. Now we'd like to take a couple moments to answer some questions from the audience. If you have any questions, just let me know. And then I will also take a look at the chat here on the Zoom and answer any questions you guys have. So actually, it looks like there are 12 in the Q&A or something like that. So let's start with that. So what evidence is there that clean air standards will help economic development more than it will hurt? So that sounds a great question for what evidence is there that clean air standards will help economically more than it's going to hurt the communities?
There is a public health cost of not acting not transitioning to clean energy. There's a terrible health burden from that. And transitioning into a clean energy economy is going to deliver economic benefits from avoided school absences or days lost from not being to work. And it will also lead to transitioning to a better economy that is focused on renewable energy and not on fossil fuels.
And I can speak to the cost of asthma in the United States. Currently, asthma costs $50 billion a year, according to the CDC. So economically, asthma is costing more because of the influence that air pollution has on our communities, and the air pollution is increasing prevalence of asthma as well as exacerbating our already existing cases.
Thank you. Sadly, the direct evidence is there. So are there any gaps and limitations in the EPA's air pollution standard and that need to be addressed? What are the main areas of improvement?
Well, the standards, there are a multiplicity of standards, as I mentioned, and the carbon standards from power plants are but one of them. The consensus is that they need to be as strong as they can be, to be as protective of public health as they can be, using the most current science and the best available science that public health professionals and climate professionals and have developed to be able to strengthen the protections for human health. There's always room for improvement in the science. It's a scientific process that iterative. It goes over multiple sort of iterations and revisions. But we trust that the EPA will use the best available science to enact the strongest protections that they can do.
I'll also add that these standards are not onerous. These standards are easily compliable and are existing technology. So the enactment of them and the enforcement of it is also extremely important as we move forward to protect the health of our communities. So we have a question or a couple themes here. What the impact really of fossil fuel pollution on our health. So globally and nationally, what are the science, what are the statistics? So for instance, I do know a Harvard study last year or the year before came out and said 1 in 5 people globally died prematurely from fossil fuels, particularly the burning of greenhouse gases. And then in the US, it's 350,000 community members, families, kids every single year. So this is a significant problem. And I'm sure if you guys have anything to add, please.
Yes, and as I said during my testimony, the greenhouse gases influence poor health, as well as increase health disparities among one's life course. So the more greenhouse gases one is exposed to, the more likelihood that they will have a reduced life longevity rate, as well as other comorbidities such as asthma, COPD, and a risk of obtaining certain cancers. And to combat that, we must limit the amount of greenhouse gases that we are putting into our atmosphere and push for more climate-friendly policies.
Great. And then for Commissioner Miller, there's a question on what additional policies and how this helps state and local policies with the greenhouse gas standards.
Well, I think from a purely governmental perspective, it allows the opportunity to welcome and create business opportunities, educational opportunities, training opportunities. to have folks work on these solutions, improve what we have, train workers to be able to do these jobs, to help implement and monitor the implementation of these standards. I think it's really important. It can have a big impact throughout not just my community, but Montgomery County as a whole, and statewide and frankly nationwide. We're doing our part locally, but we need to help at the federal level. We can only do but so much. So we're really excited to see how these standards get implemented, so we can help to foster them at a local level.
Great, thank you, sir. And while I questions, those of you in the audience would like to ask a question, please don't be shy. All right, we have one question. And this might be going back to you, Commissioner, or others, but there are other things we can do in Congress that can help our communities. So essentially the question was, what does can Congress do to support these regulations, and what other actions can be taken? All right, so since EPA works on the federal side, Elected Officials to Protect America has a climate emergency plan that has over 10 points that specifically outline what we can do to protect the health of our communities, and that range from electrification to capping gas wells, ensuring methane is not leaking. So all these come together to form the policies that are needed in Congress to protect their communities from the methane leaks, the harmful chemical leaks in some places that are flavored like cotton candy, so the kids don't realize they're being slowly poisoned, as was in LA. And then all the way up to the larger strategic picture where we have a horrendous humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, where we need to help them rebuild their communities with clean distributed energy. So it's a comprehensive effort that Congress can be working on. But for right now, Congress can also support the EPA in passing legislation that transitions from dirty energy to clean energy. Because that transition and providing the ability for the companies not just to be in the past, but move forward and protect the communities that they are a part of. I think we have.
Thank you. I think it would be important also to point out that the Environmental Protection Agency retains the authority and the obligation to regulate carbon pollution from power plants. That is their mission. The mission of the EPA is to protect public health, to enact the strongest possible standards. So regardless of the recent Supreme Court decisions that may have curtailed some of the ability of the EPA to do its job, the agency and the ruling was very clear that the agency still retains the ability and the obligation to regulate carbon emissions.
Thank you. That's an important point. All right, let me see. All right, okay, last question for Commissioner Miller, and you'll get to close us out. So the question is, is there an example in a community where you can see these standards would make a difference? What will make the largest impact to help the residents?
Right. I had answered this in writing, but I'll do my best to provide the answer verbally as well. Kind of going back to what I said in my original statement, the standards will ultimately reduce school and work absences, which will improve, at their heart, first and foremost, improve public health. And so we're looking at it from a health perspective. We want to see a healthier community. At the same time, you can look at it from a business perspective as well to say, hey, we're going to be able to keep people in school and not have to miss days of school recovering from asthma attacks, and parents and guardians are going to be able to continue to do their jobs and support their families. Furthermore, here in West Norriton Township, our population skews a bit older and a bit less affluent than Montgomery County as a whole. So these health issues, these catastrophic issues of asthma attacks, COPD exacerbations, et cetera, tend to hit out residents like ours a little harder. So I think that those standards can help to reduce medical debt, maintain and improve folks' quality of life, and keep people from minimize their impact on the healthcare system, et cetera, and keep them present for their families and loved ones. That, I believe, will be the largest impact to our residents, in my opinion.
It really is about protecting the health and the prosperity of those within our communities and nation. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. We look forward to any follow-up. If you have other questions, please reach out directly. The press release will be sent out shortly. And again, thank you for attending.